appeal, and I had to express our family's opposition to the death penalty and the message of forgiveness.
And Mr. Oltashuni?
Yeah, I think that, and I'm certainly moved by Charles's experience, and I really appreciate him being able to, be a face up here to rise above, people's desire for revenge. In my case, I spent 20 years on Tennessee's death row, and I mean every possible thing that could have went wrong in a death penalty trial, first off, went wrong in my case, and which led to me ultimately being convicted and sentenced to death. I think the important thing for me to say to those people that's out here listening is that as long as we have the death penalty, innocent people gonna end up being killed. And I think that we have to decide as a society and as certainly Tennesseans how we want to respond to the likelihood of an innocent person being executed. Like I said, I sit over there for nearly 20 years, and I'm not convinced, based on some of the people that I met over there and learned about their situation, that is not somebody in the same position that I found myself. And I think that we, like I said, as a state, we really have to be concerned about that. It's a miracle that I'm sitting here. I mean, I'm sitting here despite the system, not because the system worked. And I think a lot of time people, have this blind belief in the system that the system's good working, and the right people there. You got people sitting over there on death row. It's certainly not hell for the worst of the worst. You got people sitting over there. A person sitting over there on death row, for instance, was playing with a gun and accidentally shot and killed somebody. But because he wanted to exercise his right to a trial, then he was punished by the state seeking a death penalty against him after he refused to take a 25-year sentence. So the death penalty certainly it has problems, and I think that we have to, like I say, we have to decide how we're going to respond to people that commit certainly some horrific acts, just like Mr. Strobel said happened to his family.
Now, Ms. Rector, you are aware, I'm sure, that over the last 24 hours, we've had throughout the nation at least three, as a matter of fact, executions. Now, what would you say in reference to that during this during this segment of the show?
Well, I mean, obviously for reasons you've heard from Ndume in particular, I mean, it's problematic that we know how broken the system is, that people are ending up on death row because they're too poor to hire attorneys. They're people with intellectual disabilities and mental illness. We know that there have been 144 people released from death rows across this country when evidence of their wrongful convictions came to light. We know that there are serious problems, and yet we continue to execute people with a system that, frankly, we should not be trusting to ultimately decide who lives and who dies. We have alternatives to the death penalty in Tennessee and around the country. There are life sentences, there's life without the possibility of parole, that are actually less expensive to taxpayers, that give victims' family members legal finality much quicker than the decades-long process of going through capital litigation, and that don't risk executing innocent people. So the question would be, why do we believe that we need to continue to do this? And frankly, I think that's changing, and people are beginning to say, maybe we don't need to be doing this.
And so, Mr. Strobel, you think that the death penalty is something that we ought not to have in the state of Tennessee, and so you're out as an advocate in reference to this?
Yes, and as Stacy has said, it doesn't fit the circumstances of justice and fairness and its application across the board. And we have alternatives that we're not talking about letting everybody go free. Right. If they've committed some horrendous crime, there's a way to contain that person and some secure surroundings, and it's cheaper. When you talk about all the cost of appeals after appeals after appeals, people are spending the state's spending millions of dollars to try to execute somebody. And from a family member victims, from our perspective, you remain stuck at that moment of death, of the murder, and are not able to move on with your life as hard as it is. And so by our offering an opportunity to give that person a chance for life without parole, we were able to move on as hard as it was as a family and not remain stuck in the appeal process.
And so there's something in reference to revenge and your own peace of mind. Is that what we're saying in a real sense?
Well, our faith perspective is a Christian perspective, and the founder of Christianity, Jesus himself, talks about forgiveness. And I think that overrides all other principles.
Very good. And of course, Mr. Olatashunte, when we come back during this final segment, we'll start with you and we'll have you to give some other statements. We'll have 10 minutes for this final segment. And let me encourage our audience to continue to listen and watch and listen for the final segment of the show. Thank you and welcome back to the final segment of the show for today. The topic is the Tennesseans for an alternative to the death penalty, and we have with us as our guest Ms. Stacy, Mr. Olatashunte, and Mr. Strobel. And of course, Ms. Stacy, let's start off by giving you an opportunity to talk about some of the things that your organization is involved in order to make Tennesseans much more aware of the death penalty.
Well, we travel the state talking to people about this, trying to provide people with information. A lot of folks you'll hear say support for the death penalty is a mile wide and an inch deep because people simply don't know that much about it. And once we give people the facts, once they understand how unfairly it's applied, once they understand how expensive it is to taxpayers, far more than the alternatives like life and life without parole. Once they understand there are people like Ndume sitting on death row who didn't commit the crimes, once they understand what this does to victims' family members and the very long protracted process, what we begin to see is that people begin to question how smart is it as a state that we continue to have this policy when there are viable alternatives that don't take all the risks the system does. And so what we're trying to do is talk to whoever we can, faith communities, civic organizations, colleges, universities, to give them information, to let them hear firsthand from folks directly impacted, and then give them the tools to get involved. We want people to be engaged with this process, to talk to their lawmakers, to share what they've learned with their community so that we can join the other states in this country. I believe we're up to 18 now, who no longer utilize the death penalty.
Now, Mr. Olatashunte, I think when we spoke with you in reference to this earlier, you mentioned the fact that Tennessee is ready to bring back into operation the electric chair. And I think you were quite passionate in reference to that. So why don't you give us some information in reference to how this is going down and some of the thoughts that you have in reference to
Right. I think that when you think about it was only a few years ago that, well, first off, when I was sentenced to death, the only thing they had was the electric chair. But during the time that I was sitting on death row, that the politicians, many of them that still sitting in office now, excuse me, came to the sensibility about, I mean, how barbaric the electric chair actually was, and they got rid of it. But now that they struggling to get these drugs that they no longer can easily access to murder people, they decided to revert back to this barbaric practice again, and just recently had the governor sign this bill to allow the electric chair to be used again. And I think that I think it kind of speaks in volumes about, I mean, the people that's in place, because like Stacey said, I think that most people don't even have no understanding about the death penalty. And most of the time when you ask people about it, like she said, we travel all over the state and you know, around the country talking about this issue, and a lot of people, the first time that they think about it is when it comes up. Other than that, they don't really have no understanding about what it really entails, you know, in terms of the cost of people sitting. I recently, we was down on Justice Day on the Hill back in April, and we was talking to politicians about this issue, and it was one politician down there, he didn't even know how many people was on death row, but he was down there saying he supported it. And I think that, and I'm saying that's shameful. I mean, if you're a politician and you willing to put your name on this, you should at least know how many people are on death row. It's unfortunate that I think that, you know, the people that's in position to really affect some change, that they're not made to go sit down and at least look the people sitting on death row in the face and tell them that you know, this is what they support and they think is, you know, right. I think that you know, from my perspective, any way you look at it, I mean, it's really a moral outrage that we still in this day and time, you know, talking about executing people first off, but even, you know, using the electric chair. I mean, you know, we went back to the 1800s.
Now, Mr. Strobel, what do you think about the things that have been done quite recently? As a matter of fact, I think that when we had the mix-up, I mean, the problem with one of the death penalty cases that we had a couple of months ago, right. I think we've had 3 executions since then. And so what are some of your thoughts?
Stacey can speak more to those specifics, but again, the organization is about the alternatives to the death penalty. And there are legitimate alternatives to the death penalty without having to go to that great length, because when the great length we're talking about is the appeal process. And when family members have to sit at that moment in time and relive that over and over for 20 to 30 years, it's awfully, awfully painful and is not in any way supporting them. There's a myth about the closure. People say, well, if I make sure that the murderer is executed, that'll bring closure. We have no idea about closure. And
you can testify to that from a personal point of view.
From a personal point of view, there'll never be complete closure. You'll always remember it, but you have to move on with your life. And we were asked as a family to try and get on with our life as our mother would have wanted us to, not to dwell on her death, but on the positive influences of her life and the good that she did. And we had to move on. And as hard as it was to move on, we did that, and by forgiving the person and calling for his life sentence rather than an execution, we were able to move on rather than to be stuck in 20 years of reliving and reliving and reliving that horrible event.
Because every time anything happens, that has come. Okay, Ms. Olafischer.
Real quick, I just want to say this real quick. Like he said, that people sit there. I mean, look at the people in my case that they didn't. They live with this idea until, you know, now they know the truth. But and certainly there's the fact that people sit as long as I did is no argument to somehow they should speed up the death penalty,
Right.
because if they did, then I wouldn't be sitting here.
That's right. That's right. Yeah. I mean, I think that's the issue. It has to be a long process because the system is so broken that people like in Dume, it takes decades for the truth to come out in
Right.
their cases, and yet what it does to family members is keeps them in this awful process where things are just continuing to be so raw that they can't begin to heal. When we have alternatives that hold folks accountable, that take violent folks off the street, but that don't risk executing people like in Dume, and that gives these families legal finality, a sense of legal finality much quicker. We have to ask ourselves why we continue. And I think, just to piggyback on what we were discussing with the electric chair, I think part of what we're seeing is as this system is becoming unsustainable, as it's becoming so unwieldy and broken and difficult to maintain, we're seeing folks still trying to fix it. And the things they're trying to use to fix it are actually more damaging. And so what I think we will see ultimately is the realization it can't be fixed.
And if it can't be fixed in the state of Tennessee, what do we do? Do we forget it? What do we do if when the legislature comes to a realization that we cannot fix the situation, even with the electric chair and et cetera, then the next alternative is what?
We repeal the death penalty like states like Maryland and New Jersey and Illinois and Connecticut have done, and other states have done. We repeal the death penalty. We take those millions of dollars of resources that we've been spending to maintain the death penalty, and we use those to support murder victims' family members in the wake of homicide, and we use those for things we know prevent violence.
Okay, very good. Let me, over the last half minute, thank the three of you for bringing that information by in reference to some alternatives to the death penalty, and perhaps something that the three of you might have said today might have an impact upon some of those legislators, because that's where we have to start. Is that right? And of course,
public and the legislature. Yep.
And let me encourage our audience to tune in again next week for another informative edition of Comments. Thank you and good morning. Thank you and welcome to the show this morning. The topic this morning is elder abuse. And we're fortunate to have two persons to talk about elder abuse with us this morning. The first person is Ms. Maribeth Feringer. And Ms. Feringer later will give us some information in reference to her background, education, and her experiences. And Ms. Grayman, Ms. Diane Grayman, will give us essentially the same information in reference to her background, education, and experience. And of course, Ms. Farragher, after we get that information, then we'll be able to go into this segment as well as the second segment dealing with the topic this morning of elder abuse.
Right.
And one of the most important things I think that we have to talk about, Ms. Farragher, is elder abuse and a definition in reference to elder abuse after you give us some information about your background, education, and your experiences.
Okay. I have been working for the Council on Aging for 23 years. I'm the executive director now, and this was a job that I fell into. I majored in business, and really to run a nonprofit agency, you need a business background to be able to handle everything. But our agency is not a direct service provider. What we do is bring together groups around specific topics where we see a need or a gap in services for seniors or for their caregivers. And then we try to come up with some solution. That might be a new program, it might be some materials, or it can be a study, it can be legislative action. And with this elder abuse topic, we're kind of seeing all of those come to bear in that.
Very good. Now, Ms. Grumman, what about you, your background, your education, and some of your experiences before coming to us this morning?
Sure. I have a master's in social work from the University of North Carolina in Chapel Hill, and I've been the executive director of the Alzheimer's Association here in Middle Tennessee, off and on for 10 years before I joined Mental Health America as their program director about 4 years ago. I've been on the Council on Aging Board of Directors, on their Leadership Council, and now I'm chairing the Elder Abuse Initiative.
And so both of you have been involved in activities dealing with the elder for the longest, is that right?
Absolutely.
Okay, Ms. Farringer, when we talk about elder abuse, exactly what are we talking about?
It's a really pretty broad definition, and in general, we consider elder abuse to be the lack of care or inappropriate care for a vulnerable adult. And that can be someone with a disability too, in addition to just being elderly. But there's physical abuse, there's emotional abuse, there's sexual abuse, there's neglect, and there's self-neglect where the senior just is incapable of taking care of themselves. And then probably the biggest or the most common is financial exploitation.
And so the elder population is subjected to quite a number of challenges in a real sense. Is that what we're saying?
They really are. And just to take the financial part as an example, many of us, when we get solicitations, we just hang up. But seniors are more kind. This may be the only call they get all day. And so they're more likely to listen to that caller and maybe fall into a trap of financial exploitation. And in terms of physical abuse, let's say, oftentimes they're dependent on someone to take care of them in order to stay in their home. And unfortunately, many times it is this caregiver, often a relative, who is the abuser, but they're dependent on that person, so they hesitate to fight back or to report the person.
Ms. Herman, when you think in terms of your own career, and we've got about a minute here, and I'll simply pose this question, and when we have our commercial break, we'll come back and we'll start with you. When you think in terms of your own career, what are some of the things that you've found in dealing with elder abuse and relationships that elders have with others during your own career, and that you would like to bring to us this morning in reference to your situation?
Well, I think that emotional abuse is often overlooked and can be so demeaning to the person on the other end. I think we don't realize the yelling, the cursing, some of the things that are said that we don't realize what an effect it might have on the self-esteem of that other person and what it might do to their outlook on life, their quality of life.
In other words, interpersonal relationships have a very, very important part to play in terms of the relationship between the elders and other persons.
They're relative caregivers as well as the paid caregivers.
Very good. And of course, let us take this first commercial break, and we'll be back with our audience following this very, very short commercial break. Grumman. Thank you and welcome back to the second segment of the show for the day. The topic is elder abuse, and we're talking to Ms. Farringer and Ms. Grumman. And of course, ladies, let me again welcome you back to the second segment. And let's start with you, Ms. Grumman, by having you to talk about elder abuse from a mental position or from a mental situation, bringing to bear all of your experiences and whatever over the next 3 or 4 minutes in reference to that.
Well, I think when we look at those older adults that have a diagnosis, or maybe not a diagnosis, but are experiencing symptoms of dementia, that brings in an added element of vulnerability for that person. When Adult Protective Services gets involved, they have to look at lack of capacity that person might have in order for them to be able to make a decision for him or herself. If they lack capacity, then Adult Protective Services has more ability to step in and be able to do something for that person legally. If the person has capacity to make the decision for him or herself, then they can either choose to bring legal action against their abuser on their own. They can refuse the services of Adult Protective Services on their own. But because of dementia, that person may not have the ability to take care of themselves in terms of activities of daily living or make decisions with regard to their own health care, their own medical care. They may not be able to take their medication properly. Thus, their health care deteriorates and they're in a very, even more physically vulnerable situation.
And so, Ms. Farringer, what we're saying here is that there's a real problem dealing with the elder, and I think that's some of the things that you pointed out in the article that you wrote not quite recently for the Tennesseans. Why don't you make some statements in reference to how that fits into what we're doing here?
Right. Of course, the elderly population is growing, so this is already a huge problem, and it's just going to get bigger. I think the main point that many people may not realize is that all of us, whether we're a healthcare professional, law enforcement professional, a neighbor, a relative, or a friend, if we suspect elder abuse, any of the forms that I mentioned, we have a legal responsibility to report it to Adult Protective Services. It can be anonymous. They will not reveal your name to the abuser. And you don't have to know that it's elder abuse. You just have to suspect that it's elder abuse. And then you report it to Adult Protective Services of the Department of Human Services. And it's their job to investigate whether these suspicions are true, whether there's cause, and to kind of follow through with what Diane mentioned. But all of us have that responsibility to make those reports so that it can be investigated. I think the other thing is maybe we think most elder abuse is done by a a paid caregiver, either in a facility or someone that's paid to come in the home. But a vast portion of elder abuse is done by someone that the elder knows, usually a relative. So that's something else to be aware of. We found it a little disconcerting that oftentimes seniors are not taken seriously. That if they say she hit me or she didn't give me my food, we say, oh, she didn't know what she was talking about. Perhaps they do have Alzheimer's or some other dementia, but we need to at least investigate it and look into it.
And of course, Ms. Grumman, when we think in terms of elder abuse, what about the interpersonal relationships that the elder population might have with younger persons within that family? Is there any kind of relationship between, see, generally they talk about domestic violence, for example. Can we say the same thing about elder abuse that we say about domestic violence, that it transcends all social, economic areas and et cetera?
Absolutely.
Is that we find it everywhere?
That's exactly right.
Uh-huh.
And we're seeing a lot of grandchildren now responsible for their grandparents. So you can see the burden and responsibility that young people are now trying to handle, where the parents, the adult parents or adult children may not be in the picture anymore, and these younger adult grandchildren then are in place of their parents in taking care of the grandparents.
And so elder abuse is not confined to poor people, middle class people. It's no matter who they are, and we find them in all social, economic areas and et cetera.
Absolutely not. And in terms of self-neglect, this occurs frequently to older people who are living in very isolated conditions, who are living alone, who may be in their own home, and they aren't seen anymore by neighbors and friends. They're not driving anymore. They're holed up in their home for one reason or another, and the food is going bad in their refrigerator. They're not eating properly, poor nutrition. They're not getting to the doctor. They're not taking their medication properly. And you see this a lot in houses of hoarders, for example, that might be older. So in terms of this elder abuse initiative, we have such a variety of professionals on our committee now. We're even looking to the U.S. Postal Service to help identify those particular persons in those homes that are isolated by the postal workers even.
And so what we're getting ready to do, Ms. Grumman, for this final segment, we'll come back, Ms. Farringer, with you, and then we'll be able to have 10 minutes to allow the two of you to simply talk about some things that you would like to talk about that we've not talked about up until this time, and it'll give us an opportunity to bring in some additional information that we've not covered at this particular time. But we've got about 30 seconds, and then we'll have a break, and then we'll come back for a 10-minute segment, and everything that you wanted to talk about before you got here, you didn't have a chance to talk about it, that will be your opportunity to do so. And of course, let me encourage our audience to continue with us through this final segment. Thank you and welcome back to the final segment for today. The topic is elder abuse, and we're talking to Ms. Farringer and Ms. Grumman about elder abuse. And let me continue our conversation here, Ms. Farringer, and give you an opportunity to talk about some of the things that you'd like to talk about, and we'll allow Ms. Grumman to bring us some information in reference to how some of the issues dealing with elder abuse can be reported. Let's
Okay.
start with you.
Okay, I think one thing I would emphasize is maybe there's some people out there who say, well, I don't have any elderly parents or relatives, I don't work with any elderly people, it doesn't affect me, but all of us have neighbors. And really, in a sense, the neighbors are the front line of defense. They see this person every day. They see if their habits have changed. If there's an elderly person who was pretty friendly, who went out and walked, went